Good afternoon, everyone, again, and welcome to today's statewide webinar hosted by SPEDTex and Partners Resource Network. My name is Gracie Whitley, and also from Region 10, we have Janetta McGuire and our Special Populations Director, Dr. April Estrada. We are part of the SPEDTex team. Joining us from Partners Resource Network, and we also use the acronym PRN, is Kristina Henning. She is Director of Statewide Services, along with Stephanie McLaughlin, PRN's Training and Evaluation Specialist. Joining us from TEA, Huck Spear. He is the Family Engagement and Outreach Coordinator, along with Kristin McGuire, and we're going to introduce her formally a little bit later in the presentation. The topic for today's webinar is House Bill HB 3928, Dyslexia Q and A with Kristin McGuire. We have a few housekeeping items we like to cover before we get started. If you need technical assistance during today's webinar, we have Brian Wilson. He appears as the black and white box. He's from Region 10. That's why it has R10. And he is available to help you with any of your technology needs during today's presentation. So feel free to send him a chat. Today's webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available on the SPEDTex website after it is made accessible. I believe Christine is going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat if she hadn't done it already, where you will be able to find that recording once it is made available. We'd also like to share that today's presentation, you'll notice on the slide deck, it'll be in both English and Spanish. The same presentation will be used during both versions of the webinar. The Spanish presentation will be held at 1:15 p.m. today. Although time does not allow for live questions and answers today, you are welcome to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will pass those along to our presenters after the webinar. So now we're going to go to our next slide. And here we're going to share information about SPEDTex, the Special Education Information Center, which is a collaborative project between the Texas Education Agency and Region 10 Education Service Center. SPEDTex helps parents understand their rights and responsibilities under IDEA and facilitate collaboration when there are concerns between the parent and the school district. We also serve as a resource for educators. SPEDTex offers support via phone, email, or live chat for families and professionals. We also offer webinars such as this one and resources that are available in English and Spanish. Now we are going to pause and allow Stephanie, or give her the opportunity to share information about Partners Resource Network.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Stephanie McLaughlin. I am the Training and Evaluation Specialist for Partners Resource Network. We are the nonprofit agency that operates the Texas statewide network of parent training and information centers. We are funded through the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. And throughout Texas, you may know us by our projects of PACT, PATH, PEN, and TEAM. Our mission at Partners Resource Network is to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities or special healthcare needs. And we do this through a network of highly skilled, regionally located coordinators who are knowledgeable in local policies, services, and resources, as well as our state and national guidelines. We provide training, information, and one-on-one assistance at no cost to Texas families and youth. We serve parents of children and youth with disabilities from birth to age 26, as well as youth self-advocates between the ages of 14 and 26. All of our services are provided in English and Spanish. And for more information, you can check out our website at prntexas.org. And you can like and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at PRN Texas. Thank you, Gracie.
Thank you, Stephanie. And so now we are going to transition to today's presentation. We are excited to welcome our presenter, Kristin McGuire. Kristin currently serves as the Senior Director of the Special Populations Policy, Reporting, and Technical Assistance Division at the Texas Education Agency. Prior to her role at the agency, she served as the Director of Governmental Relations at the Texas Council of Administrators of Special Education for 5 years, and as a policy consultant and analyst at the Texas Association of School Boards for about 10 years prior to that. She launched her career in special education by becoming a special education teacher after working in various nonprofit social services companies. Kristin continued to advance as an educator to a district level position before moving to the state education policy arena. At this point, I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to Kristin. We are super excited that she is here with us today. Kristin?
Thank you, Gracie and Stephanie, and thanks everybody for having me. I appreciate you all spending your precious time with me on this. So I wanted to just give you kind of a heads up. Gracie mentioned this in terms of questions that you might have. If you could put those in the Q&A, I pretty much can guarantee we won't have time for live questions, but they will send those questions over to us so that we can make sure and review those. And we do make periodic updates to our current frequently asked questions document about the bill. And much of that is because of feedback that we receive or questions that we receive from the field in the schools as well as parents. So I do expect and anticipate an update to the FAQ here in the next week or two, and we will of course consider questions that come in today. So for today, we did get a lot of pre-submitted questions, and so we will address those through our presentation today. And I do think that these represent a lot of the questions we get most often. So hopefully it will help you and your implementation of this bill. So I will go ahead and try and get my screen started here. And we will get us going. Okay. All right, you guys let me know, break in if I'm not sharing appropriately, but I think I got the slideshow up here.
Yes, we can see it.
All right, thanks, Gracie. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. Again, as was mentioned, we did get pre-submitted questions and we will discuss those, and the Spanish version of our webinar will immediately follow this as well. So we are going to arrange this kind of in some categories here. So we'll talk a little bit about Section 504 and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, just to kind of preface the global pieces of kind of how we got here and what these particular laws are. And then I want to talk a little bit about how evaluation for dyslexia was impacted by this bill, as well as instruction. So about Section 504 and the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So a lot of times we get questions about, what is the difference between these two provisions? So of course, first thing is whenever I say special education, what that really means is it is connected, of course, to IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So Section 504 is a civil rights statute that focuses on non-discrimination rights based on certain characteristics, one of those being disability. So in the school setting, Section 504 prohibits schools from discriminating against individuals with disabilities in accessing and receiving school services. The term special education, as I mentioned, is taken from IDEA, and that extends grants to schools to provide specially designed instruction to students with disabilities to meet their unique educational needs. So special education under IDEA has specific requirements that schools must follow, as well as specific parent and student rights. So the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, or OSERS, we love our acronyms, at the federal level administers the IDEA. Whereas the Office for Civil Rights, OCR, enforces compliance with Section 504. So IDEA and Section 504 have different definitions of disability as well. So all students receiving services under IDEA are also protected by Section 504. However, not all students protected by Section 504 are eligible for special education services under IDEA. So I wanted to just sort of preface that within our discussion. And then also to that, I wanted to mention to you a little bit about the form. Let me go ahead and stop sharing here for a second, and I'm going to pull up. Oh, I got too many things open. One of the things that is required by HB 3928 is when dyslexia is a suspected disability. And that student might be a child with disability who receives special education services or who needs special education services. There's a form that is required to be communicated to parents around this whole idea of, you know, what are the IDEA rights? What are the special education rights that might be additional to those under 504? So what the agency, or how the agency created that form, is to really kind of give you a visual of, you know, to talk about what is special education services and how does that help your child. And so it is a form that just kind of gives a really sort of basic timeline and sort of categories of how we get to even begin the special education process to what it means to actually receive services. And so we talk about that from the lens of, you know, the referral process, and then of course, consenting to evaluations, what that evaluation looks like. And then of course, getting to that point of what we call in Texas, the Admission Review and Dismissal Committee, or the ARD committee, discussing eligibility for special education services, again, discussing consent, and then developing an individualized education program, or IEP, and delivering those services. So this is available on our dyslexia webpage that we'll make sure is in the chat, along with our FAQ for this particular bill, which is HB 3928. So I just wanted to show that. I know many of you have already seen it and are familiar with it, but just kind of wanted to give you a sense of where we are with this idea of kind of what the difference is between 504 and special education. And that particular form goes into the concepts of what special education is. All right, so our first, hold on just a second. Okay. All right, so then I want to get into some questions about evaluation that were submitted. So the question being, or the main question is, what has changed in the evaluation and identification process to ensure students with dyslexia are identified? So the law now requires that someone with specific knowledge of the reading process, dyslexia and related disorders, and dyslexia instruction serve on the local education agency, or LEA, which really just means district or open enrollment charter school for the most part. That person would serve on a multidisciplinary team. That is the team who works together originally to discuss what evaluations and what data is necessary to conduct an evaluation for a student. So additionally, this type of member with that specific knowledge is required in a ARD, that ARD committee, where eligibility or continued eligibility for special education services based on dyslexia will be determined. When should my child be evaluated for special education if they currently have a 504 plan for dyslexia? So Section 504 committees must begin the process of discussing a student's continued need for an evidence-based dyslexia program and submitting referrals for special education evaluations. One thing I want to point out with this term evidence-based dyslexia program, that is what the agency is using for purposes of those currently under State Board of Education rules. There is a requirement for an evidence-based reading program for dyslexia. In our current dyslexia handbook, there is, some distinction between what is called standard protocol dyslexia instruction and other types of dyslexia instruction. What this bill does is essentially narrows everything down to that dyslexia instruction is specially designed instruction. So in this case, we are referring to that in the sense of an evidence-based dyslexia program. So if a student, Section 504 committees are beginning the process of discussing a student's continued need for an evidence-based dyslexia program and submitting referrals for special education evaluations. So the agency anticipates that each LEA should hold a Section 504 committee or meeting, as soon as possible, but no later than the end of the 2024-2025 school year to determine whether the student continues to need that evidence-based program. And if so, then they would refer that student for a special education evaluation. Got a question of what does it mean to be dyslexia only? So there really isn't a dyslexia only eligibility. However, state law now clarifies that that dyslexia can be considered the specific learning disability, or SLD, that a student is identified with instead of, or in addition to, the typical SLD areas of basic reading or reading fluency. So when a student is evaluated for dyslexia, there are specific elements to consider, and these are described in the Dyslexia Handbook. So just as for any other SLD, there is no one test that determines the presence or absence of a disability. It's based on the preponderance of evidence. So while the overarching disability of SLD, that specific learning disability, will be collected from LEAs as the disability code for purposes of state data collection, it's reasonable to interpret that your LEA software, your IEP software providers or vendors and IEP paperwork would document a child's identification as an SLD of dyslexia. So if my child was evaluated for dyslexia and is receiving instruction under a 504 plan for dyslexia, does my child need to be fully tested for dyslexia again in order to qualify for special education services? And I would say that depends. So it will be considered an initial evaluation for your child for special education. So if you provide, as a parent, informed consent to evaluate, that MDT, that multidisciplinary team, will conduct a review of existing evaluation data, or what we call a REED, R-E-E-D. After this review, the MDT will determine what additional data is needed. So if the student has a previous special education evaluation that was recently completed, additional norm reference testing may not be needed. This might help expedite the evaluation process. So the MDT then should collect updated information since the last evaluation about the child's reading progress from the parent, teachers, and any intervention specialists, including the provider of dyslexia instruction, as well as determine whether updated classroom observations should be done. Will my child continue to receive dyslexia instruction while they are being evaluated for special education? So if this is a situation where a student was receiving dyslexia instruction under a Section 504 plan and the LEA has referred the student for a special education evaluation based on this law, the student should continue to receive instruction through an evidence-based dyslexia program while awaiting that parental consent for the evaluation, its completion, and then the subsequent eligibility determination. Will my child lose access to their current dyslexia instruction if I do not wish for them to receive special education? What are my options if I do not wish to consent to a special education evaluation? So this law clarified that students needing specific instruction for an identification of dyslexia demonstrate the two prongs that are necessary for special education eligibility. In other words, an identified disability, in this case dyslexia, since it's the specific learning disability, and a need for specially designed instruction based on that disability. In this case, the need for an evidence-based instructional program for dyslexia. This means that this type of instructional need can no longer be considered as a non-discrimination protection regarding access to services under Section 504. Instead, this need is considered specially designed instruction or special education. That said, it is important to remember that unless an ARD committee which is the committee determining eligibility and the services that are required to meet that student's unique needs, decides that the student needs something other than the evidence-based dyslexia program, the student is likely not to experience a large impact or shift in their required services. It's also important to remember that special education is not a place. It is not a separate program or classroom where a student is sent all day. Special education is a service that is provided to meet the unique educational needs of a student with an identified and eligible disability. And that's what the ARD committee determines. And the parent, of course, is a required member of that committee. If a child attends a private school or is being homeschooled, can a parent request that they be tested for dyslexia by the local school district? The answer to that is yes. A parent may request that their child be tested for dyslexia if the child attends a private school or is being homeschooled. A parent would contact the district at which the student would attend if the student attended public school. If my child completed a dyslexia remediation program and currently receives 504 accommodations, is my child required to be evaluated for special education? No, if the 504 committee feels that the student does not have the need for special education services. So if a student is currently receiving only instructional accommodations and other regular education aids and services under a Section 504 accommodation plan, that is not being provided an evidence-based dyslexia program because the student does not have the educational need for that, then an LEA cannot discontinue those protections and plan, with the exception of the already required periodic Section 504 reviews to document a student's continued impairment and continued need for 504 protections. So if they do not need if they do not need specially designed instruction, which in this case, what we're kind of talking about is that evidence-based dyslexia program, they could continue on a 504 accommodation plan to address those access needs and accommodation needs for dyslexia. All right, so my child was receiving dyslexia services through Section 504. The school did an evaluation and said my child does not qualify for special education services. What are my options? So I think this goes back a little bit towards the earlier question in terms of if it was a fairly recent evaluation, within the last couple of years, and at that point was determined that the student was not eligible. That is a situation where it would again be considered sort of an initial evaluation again, but that multidisciplinary team could determine what additional data is necessary, which may not be, it may not be the norm reference tests, because we probably likely have that as part of the former evaluation or the previous evaluation. It may be getting those updated informal data up to date. So your dyslexia provider, instruction providers update progress notes. It would be looking at other interventions that have been provided, potentially a classroom observation. However, if it is an issue where they've now done an evaluation, said that the child does not qualify, if you disagree with a school's evaluation, so one option that IDEA and state law have is that a parent can request an independent educational evaluation, or IEE, at the school's expense. So an IEE is done by someone outside of the school, although the evaluation would still need to meet the school's criteria for the evaluation. So a school does have an option in this case to ask for a due process hearing if the school believes its evaluation is appropriate. ARD committees do have to consider IEEs that meet LEA criteria, though, whether or not these are paid for by the school. If you feel that the ARD committee determined eligibility or ineligibility contrary to the law, there are also specific provisions in place for a parent to challenge those decisions. So these include dispute resolution options such as mediation, state complaints, and due process hearings. So parents, of course, are encouraged to read through the Notice of Procedural Safeguards document and the Parent's Guide to the ARD process, both of which are posted on the SPEDTex website for more information about those as well. What evaluation information should I receive if my child is evaluated for dyslexia? So parents are provided with multiple resources during the referral and evaluation process, but specifically related to an evaluation, as this question indicates, parents must be provided with a copy of the evaluation report. So parents should get that. All right, so questions about instruction. When should schools schedule dyslexia instruction? So students receiving special education services must have a school day that is commensurate with students without disabilities. So in other words, their instructional day should align with that of their peers. However, an ARD committee could determine that a shortened or modified school day is appropriate for a student based on his or her unique needs. While a school's master schedule and existing staff assignments can be a factor in scheduling dyslexia instruction for a student, decisions regarding scheduling should not solely be made to accommodate existing structures. The ARD committee should discuss scheduling, including the replacement of any electives, before those decisions are made. So this is something that, schools, are in an almost impossible situation of scheduling everything that needs to be done. But it is something that is definitely at issue that ARD committees need to make sure and discuss before making any significant changes to a student's schedule that would either kind of take them out of a particular elective. Definitely would not be something that would be allowable to provide before or after, or mandate, I guess, participation before or after school, because that's not in alignment with commensurate day or commensurate school day. All right, what size group should my child be in when they are receiving dyslexia instruction? So each school district and open enrollment charter school is required by the State Board of Education, the SBOE, to approve or develop a dyslexia instruction program that addresses all of the required components and instructional methods outlined in the Dyslexia Handbook. So these instruction programs must be evidence-based, meaning that there has been research conducted on the success of the program on improving reading results for children with dyslexia. Overwhelmingly, one of those research components is about the appropriate group size to teach the program without hindering individual student results. When schools choose a program, they are looking for these types of statements regarding how to teach the program with fidelity. As each program must be taught with fidelity, each school should keep within the stated group size. While the ARD committee could always modify group size based on the needs of a particular child, a modification in this context would refer to a lower group size rather than a larger group size. The dyslexia program's fidelity statements and expectations should be followed with regard to the size of the student group. Alterations can be made only when it's going above the required standard in order to serve the student more appropriately. It must not be made deliberately to circumvent the components of fidelity that do not directly benefit the student. So this is also where I will kind of chime in here to say that there is no, we do get questions sometimes about, what are the required programs for dyslexia instruction. At this point, neither the Dyslexia Handbook or the state board rules or the agency has a list of any, quote unquote, approved, evidence-based dyslexia programs. What is included in the handbook and in the rules are the requirements associated with those programs. So that is something that each LEA is required to comply with in terms of what is necessary for those particular programs. Should there be a special education teacher on campus that has been trained to provide dyslexia services? So when we're specifically talking to actual providers of dyslexia instruction, which we kind of, again, another acronym, just abbreviate PDI, providers of dyslexia instruction by the state law do not have to be a certified special education teacher unless that particular LEA employs that provider in a position that requires special education certification. However, each provider, of course, has to be fully trained in the LEA's instructional materials for that program or programs, depending on what they use. So they do not have to be special education certified unless they are otherwise required. If they are employed in a position that requires that certification, the key piece of training here is full training in the instructional materials related to the program. We get a question quite a bit of, what happens when the dyslexia therapist is out? How are districts required to make up the missed instruction? So again, one of the components, under IDEA, schools are required to provide a free appropriate public education, what we call FAPE. And that includes providing the special education and related services consistent with that student's IEP or individualized education program. So if a student's performance becomes negatively impacted due to frequent absences, an ARD committee should address the schedule of delivery of services and consider the appropriateness of compensatory services, basically makeup services. It's not necessarily a one-to-one makeup for missed services. There's nothing in IDEA or state rules and regulations that directly address absences. However, TEA guidance for students served under IDEA would be the following. If the provider is absent and the student does not get special education or related services because of the provider's absence, then that time needs to be made up. If the student is absent on a specific day and the IEP says the student is supposed to get services on that specific day, for example, daily or first and second Monday of the month, then the service doesn't necessarily have to be made up. If the student is absent and the IEP says the student is supposed to get services, say once per week, but not specified, can happen any day, and the student was absent on the day the provider was planning to provide the service, the district would provide the service on a day the student is present. So, or must make that service up. So kind of depends on how it's written into the IEP. If there's a long-term denial of services based on a provider absence, then the ARD committee should consider if compensatory services are needed. If there are repeat issues with student absences or patterns of absences, the ARD committee should already be considering what can be done to mitigate that and consider if compensatory services are necessary in that context. So that was a large answer or a long answer of basically saying it's going to look at the student's schedule of services, what is required as far as their specially designed instruction, and really, how the student is progressing through their instruction and whether there's, kind of a pattern or sort of long-term absence of services. We get the question of what training does the state require for dyslexia substitutes? So substitutes in general typically meet local qualifications required by each individual LEA for which they're substituting. So if a substitute is provided for a provider of dyslexia instruction, the person would have to be qualified as a PDI if it is going to be considered that specially designed instruction that is agreed to in the IEP. So if it is going to be considered the special education service that is required under the student's IEP, then that person would have to be trained. Otherwise, it's a situation kind of on the previous slide of considering whether the time can be made up or what the student's needs are. Oh, and I forgot that this was already a question on here. Kind of already answered it. But is there a list of approved dyslexia programs for Texas? And the answer to that, of course, is at this time, no, there is not a list of approved dyslexia programs. The dyslexia handbook, adopted by the State Board of Education describes the requirements for those programs and for the providers of those programs. Is there a list of approved accommodations for dyslexia? So no, there's not a list of approved accommodations for dyslexia. The ARD committee decides which accommodations a student with dyslexia would need. So the ARD committee draws on information from the initial evaluation and subsequent reevaluations. During annual review ARD committee meetings, information from progress monitoring helps in deciding those needed accommodations as well. So this should not be confused with allowable and non-allowable accommodations available on state assessments. Those are kind of separate from that. So state assessments do have some accommodations that either come embedded or are kind of optional, an approval, kind of an allowable accommodation. But instructional accommodations in general, there is no kind of one size fits all approach. That will be based on the student's needs and the data informing the ARD committee. So a question here on what steps are schools required to take for young students who are considered at risk on dyslexia screeners? Should these students automatically be referred for a special education evaluation? So if the student's considered at risk on dyslexia screeners, of course, this is an important piece of information, but the decision to refer should be based on multiple sources of data. So TEA actually has provided schools with a data tool that helps teams consider multiple areas that may impact the decision to proceed with a referral. And that is something that is on our SPED support website, which is called a student data review guide when considering a referral to special education. So it's one piece of info, one piece of data, but it is not, the decision to refer does need to be based on multiple sources of data. So essentially, if you have a student who is considered at risk, there's much more data gathering typically that would need to be done to determine whether that student is suspected of having dyslexia and the need for special education services. However, of course, caveat that to say, a parent always has the right to ask for a special education evaluation. Get a question of what dyslexia screeners can be used for children 3rd grade and under. So state law requires that all kindergarten and 1st grade students be screened for dyslexia and related disorders. However, students in other grades should always be screened as appropriate or when appropriate. So there's not a list of approved dyslexia screeners. However, there's kind of a separate piece of state law that does have a requirement to give to students in kindergarten, grades 1 and grade 2 that are kind of reading almost like diagnostic assessments that aren't really typically, they have a component of dyslexia screening in them, and many districts can use that requirement and those instruments used under that provision of law to satisfy the dyslexia screening. So they do have the option to do that. So there is a list of approved instruments according to that statute, and that's on the TEA website as well. So it does, as I mentioned, it does allow them, districts and charter schools, to use an instrument from that approved list to satisfy both requirements of the reading diagnostic instrument and the dyslexia screener. What can I do if my child has not been receiving the expected services or their accommodations for dyslexia? So you should always try to work with your school personnel to resolve any concerns. If your child is receiving special education services, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, there are several dispute resolution processes available to you. If your student has an accommodation plan under Section 504, you would need to file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR, if you believe the school is in violation of the law and you can't come to a resolution with your school personnel. Again, I'll mention that the Notice of Procedural Safeguards is a valuable resource. The Parent's Guide to the ARD process is a valuable resource. And the agency also has a dispute resolution handbook posted on its website that can be helpful in those situations as well. All right, so I wanted to also again point you to the dyslexia webpage that contains a FAQ document in relation to HB 3928. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you hadn't joined us yet, that we will be making some revisions and updates to that FAQ here within the next week or two to accommodate some questions that we've gotten from the field. Of course, I will review the questions that we received here as well to see if we can help provide some clarification on that. We did very shortly after the bill's passing, did do a quick kind of overview video of the bill and sort of kind of what the components and major sections of the bill entailed. So you're welcome. That's on the same webpage. Also, of course, on that webpage is the overview. So kind of the overview of special education for parents, as I mentioned just quickly at the beginning, that is there as well. That on that page, it is on there in English and in Spanish. On the SPEDTex webpage, there is many other translations into many other languages of that form that you can access as well. And so schools have access to that. I wanted to also mention just briefly that the dyslexia handbook itself, that is, of course, also posted on that webpage. There are requirements from the bill that will have the State Board of Education making some updates to their dyslexia handbook as well as their rules. That is mandated to happen by June 30th of 2024. So again, as we as we get that guidance and as those updates are made, then we will adjust, our guidance accordingly to make sure we align with the revisions to the dyslexia handbook. So just wanted to let you know, there is an appendix, kind of a question and answer document that goes with the dyslexia handbook that's also posted on that webpage. What we did, just because that appendix, is technically supposed to go to the handbook or go with the handbook, and some of what's in the handbook, of course, needs to be revised in light of this bill. What we did with that appendix was essentially just sort of crossed out, kind of struck through those questions and answers that don't now align with the state law. So those are just questions that will need to be readdressed once the handbook is updated. And so we just incorporated those questions and answers into our overall bill FAQ. So please take a look at that page. I know that I went really quickly through all of that. I know there was a lot of information. I hope that this was helpful, for everyone. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to be here and to please share questions in that Q&A, and we will look at those and try to get more clarification out to the field as it is needed. So I appreciate you very much for coming.
Thank you, Kristin. We appreciate you being here and sharing that information. We are now going to switch our slide deck over, and we are going to come back to Stephanie McLaughlin from Partners Resource Network so that she can share some additional information. Stephanie?
Thank you, Gracie. Thank you all for attending today. And just a reminder that we are available to answer any questions you have. You can reach out to us at the number listed. Check out our website at prntexas.org and like and follow us on Facebook at PRN Texas, and be on the lookout for our upcoming spring lineup of webinars coming very soon. Thank you, Gracie.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's always a pleasure to work in collaboration with Partners Resource Network. And we also have some additional information, just reminders about SPEDTex, the Special Education Information Center. Please keep in mind, we are your source for special education information. So if you have questions, need resources, or additional information, contact us at SPEDTex. Our experts are available via email, phone, or live chat, and we are more than happy to assist. You are also can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And also when you go to our website, you will notice it is available in English and Spanish. And we do have a monthly newsletter where we also share some additional resources that are helpful. In addition to our newsletter, we do offer an opportunity to create a MySPEDTex account. With a MySPEDTex account, you can sign up to receive customized reminders, volunteer to participate in focus groups where you can share feedback, locate resources tailored to your needs, and you can also access training. So if you are on your computer right now and you have your phone, go ahead and scan that QR code and create a MySPEDTex account today. At this point in our webinar, we are going to pause our recording. Brian.